Hi, everyone. This is Patrick Donahoe. Welcome to episode 4 of the Wealth Standard podcast. We are on the second season of 2018, and we are theming our podcast around the principle of liberty, which is the pursuit of financial freedom. Now, the guy that I'm going to interview today, it was awesome to meet him, first off. And you may not know him. He's been on a few TV shows before. One is The Secret Millionaire, as well as the Startup Kids and Startups, the Silicon Valley edition. And he also self-published a book called Jobocalypse. And it says his subtitle is The End of Human Jobs and How Robots Will Replace Him. And he's one of those serial entrepreneurs. He's working on a really cool company right now called digits.io. If you go to that website, man, you're going to see just a really robust board of advisors. And it's around blockchain, around kind of the cryptocurrency worlds, and it's pretty fascinating. And we definitely have part of our interview dedicated to that business. But he has an awesome story, and I love stories. I love seeing where people come from. And he's from the UK originally, came to the US, but really did well during the .com era, and everything came crashing down. Learned tons of lessons, and he's just one of those guys that pushes the limits. And I love hearing those stories. So you guys are definitely going to enjoy it. Make sure you go back to listen to the first 3 episodes of 2018. As well as our first season, which when we talked about life, which is you are your greatest asset. All those are available on our website, which is thewealthstandard.com, or on iTunes. And giving us those reviews definitely help. We get more listeners every day, so we're really appreciative of those. If you have not given us a review and you like what you hear, please head over to iTunes and give us a review. If you take a picture of it and send it to podcast@paradigmlife.net, we will send you off a little gift. All right, everyone, without further ado, here's my interview with Ben Way.
Welcome to the 2018 seasons of the Wealth Standard podcast, celebrating life, liberty, and property. You are listening to Liberty, Season 2.
It is my pleasure to welcome to the show Ben Way. Ben, it's awesome to have you on. You look good. You look really relaxed.
Pleasure.
Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in beautiful Florida. Well, not so beautiful today. It's a little bit cloudy, but I can't complain.
You probably got some palm trees in your view, so even with the clouds, it's probably still pretty beautiful.
Indeed. Well, I moved from the UK for obvious reasons, so the weather here is much better.
Amen to that. I love South Florida. Well, Ben, it's I can't wait for this interview. I mean, you've done some pretty remarkable things. I'll highlight some accolades that I mentioned in the intro. But you've been on a few TV shows. You've written a book, and you're still really, really young. So maybe give us just a highlighted overview of your bio, your background, and how you kind of went off on this kind of tech transit, or this path associated with technology and startups and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, if you start right at the beginning, my entire life was built from coming from a pretty poor background, where educationally, I was written off as a kid because I was dyslexic. And I was very lucky at about 6 or 7 years old to get a laptop from the local government, and just got very good at computers, self-taught myself everything. I've never read a manual in my life. And I actually attribute that to something we don't talk about much in society, which is that there is actually a skill to learning. And fortunately, because my teacher locked me in a room by myself for many days on end, I taught myself how to learn. And so I self-taught myself computers, and always had a fascination with business. I grew up on a farm, so my first business was selling chickens' eggs, and I had a proper cash flow and the whole shebang, and some unusual risk factors in that business, like foxes and all that jazz. And then started my first business at 15. Was very lucky just to hit the timing right. The whole dot-com boom was happening at that point. Started an internet company, raised $33 million when I was 17 for what was back then a bit like Google Shopping, but 10 years before Google Shopping. During that time, I ended up advising the UK government, ended up advising the White House on the rollout of UTMS technology, and then lost everything completely. The girl I loved, my house. I didn't go bankrupt, but it was pretty close. So started completely again from scratch. And one way or another, which is a story for a different day, started Europe's first incubator called the Rainmakers. And over the last 15, 20 years, I'm getting old now, we've probably helped 250 companies get to product market fit.
Wow.
We've had some great successes, some failures, like always. But, I'm very passionate about what I do. I love technology. I love, my passions are robotics, artificial intelligence, age reversal, life extension. I love hardware. I love building things. If I'm being facetious, I'm a jack of all trades, the master of none, but I try hard and I love learning and I'm always learning. And as long as I'm learning, I think that's why we're here, right?
No, amen to that. What would you, with everything you've done, and I know you're still doing a lot more. We'll talk about your most current business in a second. But what is, when you wake up, what is it that drives that? Like, what have you identified as why you're doing what you're doing? I'm sure you asked those questions, back when you had some business, sounded like you had a pretty, catastrophic business failure. But what have you come to a conclusion of as far as what is that kind of seed that keeps fueling you?
It's actually it's actually something very challenging, which is that probably because of my childhood and because it was a very difficult childhood and because I was written off as a kid, I have never felt successful in any way, shape, sense, or form. And even though I know objectively people look at me and they're like, wow, you've done this and this, and you've had this most amazing life. And I do have an amazing life. I have but internally, what I wake up in the morning feeling is I've got so much more to achieve, or I haven't achieved enough, or, I want to make an impact. I want to make an impact on this world. I want to, do something positive, and I want to help people. And it's that that keeps driving me forward. I would love to say it was, that I wake up in the morning and I feel like I'm lucky to be alive, but it's not. It's just the fear of not achieving what I want to achieve in my lifetime.
That's it's interesting, how those moments when we're young, right? And it could have been one moment or a series of them that, plant something in us that, we carry throughout our lives. And I have, relatively little kids. I have a 4-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 13-year-old. And I'm always thinking about that. Like, man, what are they thinking about, these moments and their experiences that's going to be planted in them and really define a lot of their motivations in the future. I think it's interesting. But with the whole idea of achievement, because I can sympathize with you, empathize to an extent, based on my background. But in the end, achievement, where have you found achievement? But then also when you didn't achieve something, how have you dealt with the failure of not achieving what you had set your mind to?
Well, the thing that as I look along my life that I'm most proud of and the biggest achievement for me was actually writing my book. I actually wrote it. I didn't get a ghostwriter. I sat down and I wrote a bloody book. And because I didn't have any formal qualifications or anything like that, it's the one thing that I feel that nobody can take away from me. Like whatever people think about whether I'm successful or a failure, I wrote a bloody book. And that for me is a beautiful thing. And I really yeah, I'm really glad I did that because it was a huge challenge, a huge personal goal. In terms of dealing with failure, it gets easier over time. I think the downside to that is over time you pull in, or you restrain your expectations, and you kind of, I wouldn't say you kind of become glass half empty, but certainly you don't have the same kind of wide-eyed mysticism or belief that you have. You're kind of much more realistic, and you kind of understand the failure points, and you realize that whatever you do, about 50-50, whatever you do, about 30% is skill, 30% is luck, and 30% is timing, and 10% is who knows what. But it really is. There is a level that's completely out of your control, and you just have to accept that. And my biggest problem, throughout my career, is I've always been about 10 years too early. I mean, I can't tell you the number of businesses that I conceptualized 10 years before that suddenly, become multi-billion-dollar businesses 10 years later. But I get into them too early, and the technology is not there, or it's too hard, and
That's the whole Apple mantra, isn't it? Never be a trailblazer.
Yeah.
Always be second.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of my challenges.
Well, I look at what you've been able to do, and we can get into the book right now, but it's one of those things where, the idea of failure, I think, is ingrained in us based on education and learning, right? And that's why I found it was fascinating where you talked about, how to learn. And I think that's profound, because sometimes, especially in the US, and I know you went to school in the UK, but in the US, right, you basically are considered a failure, right, if you don't have good grades, right? Now, I know that there's some justification to that, but in the end, that's what most children think when they get bad grades. They think they're stupid. They think they're a failure. And I look at learning, and that's not learning, right? I think learning is failure. But yet the context of failure, right, is that you have fallen short, or you're somehow, stupid or inadequate or not smart. And, I've made that connection where, making mistakes, failing, right, in the end, it's teaching you. And I think we're in the hotbed of some pretty revolutionary technologies regarding every aspect of life. And so why don't you just maybe briefly talk about your book, which is Jobocalypse. Is that how you pronounce it? Jobocalypse.
Yeah, that's exactly how you pronounce it.
Yeah, the end of human jobs and how robots will replace them. I mean, talk about that, because that's one of those like stimulating titles where, you're intrigued to learn more.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I wrote that book now, God, 5 years ago. When it came out, everyone, like everything in my life, laughed at me and said, "You're crazy," and it's what the Luddites said. And look, before any revolution, it's very hard to see the wood for the trees. Right, the number of industries that have been decimated by competition they didn't see coming up. It's exactly the same for humanity as a whole. AI, robotics, automation. It may not be having an immediate effect, but it will have a fundamental transition point where it suddenly becomes a real problem for society. And my belief is that transition point will be the next major recession. Because when you're growing as an economy, an organization is operating, relatively inefficiently, but operating, then there's a huge risk in changing the way anything is done. But what you see in downturns is that companies have no choice but to take those risks. So I think what you're going to see in the next major recession is a major swing to automation. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure whether we'll recover fully. I mean, one of the trends I put out in my book is that, the recovery for every recession since like 1920 has doubled. in its recovery period. I'm not sure it will recover the next time. I think at that point, we're probably going to see the tipping point where automation really does push this divide even further.
No, the point you're making, I think, applies to a lot of different aspects of life at like a biological level, as well as business and people, where, when there is an environment of extreme pressure, right? In this case, a recession, right? That's when, the human mind kind of takes over, right? And is essentially forced to survive. And that's where you discover shortcuts, and you take risks, because the risk at a level where there's extreme pain there's not much risk associated with the pain, or there's not much pain associated with the risk. And so I totally agree, because I think right now you still have people clinging, right? And I would say not people, industries, and there's a lot of them, and probably all of them, from from cars to financial, to politics, to transportation, right? There's technology that exists right now that is not being highly adopted. And I think that you're totally spot on with the idea of a recession is going to essentially push companies to take those risks, okay? Because they're already in pain, they're already suffering. Taking a risk isn't going to make it worse, really.
Exactly. And it's going to be fascinating to see what comes out of that. And then you have all the, with robotics, you have all these kind of moral and social kind of pitfalls and environments. It's going to be, is it the Chinese proverb, or actually I believe it's a curse, may we live in interesting times.
Yeah.
Well, I think as civilization right now, we're, for many reasons, in one of the most interesting phases of our society, and it'd be interesting to see when we come out of this which way the pendulum has swung, whether we have become a more isolated, more protective society, or whether we become a more open and more of a sharing society. But my belief, and one of my great sadnesses in life, was that I always had a fundamental belief that if you shared more information, or you provided more information to the populace or the civilization, that civilization would come together more, and existing social barriers would break down, or political barriers. But we don't seem to be operating in that way as a society, and that has shocked me.
So to come to those conclusions, what are some of the examples you see of, because this is fascinating, because I would say you're right. I mean, there's always a threshold of information, right? There's only so much our brain can process at any given moment. And we tend to, form habits, and any new information is difficult to absorb, especially if it's contrary to a belief system you already have. But I do see that, the ability to communicate and share in some ways has had the opposite effect than what you think, right? Where it's divided people more so than brought them together.
Absolutely. And one of my passions or hobbies in life is looking at failed states: Venezuela, Zimbabwe, North Korea, Russia. Not that it's such a failed state, but an interesting state nonetheless. And Russia was probably the first time about 6 or 7 years ago that I realized that this kind of doctrine of opening, or information being available and giving power back to the people isn't correct. It's there's something broken in the way us humans operate, that I'm still trying to get a handle on exactly what the psychological component is. But I think my belief is along the lines that there is a certain large percentage of the population that are so fearful of change that they're prepared to grasp what they know so much stronger, because they want that level of internal protectionism. And I say this when people talk about the kind of, what happened with Trump and the whole election, and, how could anybody vote for Trump? And, I look at it the opposite way. I'm like, if you live in a small rural town in America, you're screwed. If things carry on the way they are with technology, with society, you're screwed, right? Our whole society is set up to live in cities, metropolises. If you are a farmer or somebody unskilled, and there's a vast majority of the population that are, then you are looking after your own best interests by being scared of what's coming up, and you can't blame people for that. You just gotta look at them and just like, I understand that fear, and it takes a lot to step over that chasm of the new future, because it doesn't look like the old future, and the question is, can we get there?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the, I talk a lot about the whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And I think the first need that people seek, right, is survival, right? They need, the elements, food, shelter, clothing to survive, right? And then it comes to a safer. So if you kind of go through those rungs in the hierarchy, you can kind of see where people's motivation is, because it's interesting right now. I saw this article yesterday that stated that over 40% of America can't pay like their rent and their bills.
Yeah, I saw that.
You saw that, and it's one of those, going to the point that you were making. People are afraid. When you're afraid and you're in that kind of lower rung, right? You're just trying to survive, and the way in which you think, right, is different than if you did have a knowledge of how to make money, a knowledge of you're in a safe environment, a knowledge that you have, your relationships intact. If you don't have those things, then it's like survival of the fit. You're just trying to survive. And so some decisions with that perspective sometimes don't make sense to the person, maybe like you or me, that are in this, self-esteem, self-actualized phase. Does that make sense? We look at things differently.
Absolutely. And I almost call it economic slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are a slave to your job because you literally have no bandwidth for anything else apart from to make enough money to survive. So even if you know the steps you need to take to make more money or better yourself or get better education, you are literally unable to take those steps, because to take those steps means that you can't survive. Mm-mm. So you are literally a slave to your job.
Yep.
And I don't come from a rich background, and I've lived in some pretty poor communities, and it's hell. It's if you don't get lucky, and I consider myself lucky, I was written off as a kid. I should have ended up being a farmer, milking cows, but I happened, because of my dyslexia, to get a laptop that happened to bring me into the largest growth sector the world has ever seen. But that was not, I'd love to say I planned it, but I didn't.
Yeah. Well, and that's and we could go off on a total tangent here, right? Where, the resources are there, right? For anyone, even for a farmer, for anyone that knows how to even to learn how to read, all the resources are there, and pretty much all of it is, close to free. It just comes down to, the environment that you're in, and whether or not you will use the tools, the resources in your environment to be successful, to grow, to excel, right? And that was the case with you. Like, you were in a certain environment mentally, socioeconomically, and you got a computer, and you were in that environment, and you were kind of forced to figure out how to use that to improve your life, right? Because I think we're all driven by that to an extent. But it's one of those, and I didn't plan on giving this example, but my wife is from Mexico, not a really nice part of Mexico, and her mom still lives there. and it's a really bad neighborhood. We actually, in the last couple of days, have had to move them out because there was a couple people got killed. Crazy time just in the neighborhood that we used to visit like every year. And it's one of those things, her mom, right, her mindset is shifting a little bit as to not wanting to be there anymore, but it took extreme circumstances in order to change her mind. And that's where it's, when we were talking before the show, the jobocalypse, the whole idea of robotics, taking over human jobs, it's coming. You can't avoid it. It's kind of like, the trade is coming, right? It's just a matter of time,
Yeah.
And the idea is it's going to replace menial labor. It's going to replace so much. And there's one or two things that are going to happen, like the divide that you talked about. People are either going to take the opportunity, right, to figure out how to establish new skills, move, okay, change their life, change their lifestyle, change their mentality, or they're just going to have to fight. And we all know what's going to happen to that fight. I mean, history has shown us that. Right.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, as much as I, always look at the positive, in the world and always believe, we can find a way through. I think there's going to be a huge amount of social upheaval when we get to that point, and it will be a very fast tipping point, because, I would say we're around 70% of the technical requirements of replacing a human completely. And our limitation isn't actually the brain anymore. It's, our artificial intelligence is actually way ahead of where the physical robotics is. So the mechanisms, the actuators, it's really it's really going to hit very fast when somebody builds something that can replicate 90% of all human activities. It's gonna, within 5 years, it's just gonna tip incredibly fast.
And again, this is an environment we've never been in, right? So as far as how society is going to respond, one thing I guess you can rest on, because this is what's been proven in the past, is that in those environments, that's where human beings thrive, right? When there's extreme adversity, we figure it out, and we always have. There's always been turmoil, there's always been war, there's always been conflict since the beginning of time, right? Maybe it's more known today because of communication, but I think that's, there's a human tendency to have conflict. But I think in those moments, that's where human beings sometimes shine, and that's what we can rest on. But in the end, there is going to be social upheaval. There's going to be those situations where people are going to be presented with that choice to acclimate and change their mindset, okay, or shrink, right? Those are going to be the two choices.
And I think also there's this kind of general view in humanity that because we are the most intelligent species we've ever encountered, that we're, somehow special. So, what I want people to understand is we're an imperfect species in an imperfect world.
Yep.
And if we just accepted that and actually just as a species go, okay, look, we are pretty flawed, then it may help us move past this particular challenge. I mean, as I say, I've actually finished a book. I'm finding a publisher at the moment, but I've just written my second book, which is all about artificial consciousness. And so you got artificial intelligence, which is, the ability for technology to learn. But artificial consciousness is what makes us human, consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that there is no reason why technology cannot have a consciousness. Technically, I believe that at some point, once the right system exists, then artificial consciousness will exist. That, when that happens, is going to be so fundamentally scary for humanity, because for the first time in our lives, we will not be the most intelligent species on this planet. And the implications for that, and and everything that goes around that is going to be huge. And I think we're 30 to 50 years away from that, but who knows? I mean, we're in AI, what we're doing today 10 years ago would look like magic.
Mhm. Well, dude, when that book comes out, I'm totally interviewing you again, because that is something I've thought a lot about. And, I would say in a sense, it presupposes that, consciousness or awareness can't expand in the human mind, right? Which it can't, which I believe it can. But it's one of those, this is a topic. I mean, imagine 50 years ago, like trying to explain this topic to people, right? It's amazing how much we've progressed just as a society. And have evolved, and that's kind of where my hope is. So maybe I want to talk about your company, but maybe let's kind of put this topic in transition by by me asking the question, if you I don't know if you have kids or not, but if you were talking to like a 10-year-old, right, or a 15-year-old, right, and you had 2 hours, right, you were similar to when you were forced into a room to learn, right, and you were forced to talk to this 10-year-old, what would you encourage them to do? What would you encourage as far as, whether it's a pursuit of education, a pursuit of just society and being a good citizen? I mean, what would those topics of conversation be? What would that advice be?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's, for me, there's kind of a few ways I look at it. On an educational front, I would encourage them to focus on anything that contains creativity, right? Creativity is going to be the hardest barrier for AI to jump over, and it will eventually. So I would say focus on creativity, especially creativity within technology, especially entertainment, computer games, anything that has a creative technical component to it. I would say more than anything to my children, enjoy your life. Don't try and, don't kill yourself trying to over-educate yourself and miss out on the best time of your life, which is when you're young. And everything is about balance, and you need, as a kid, you need that balance to actually experience life, make the mistakes. I would tell my children, and this is actually something I've been seeing lately, is that it seems like this generation coming up is very scared of taking any risks.
Yep.
outside of the kind of norm, which can be quite big risks, but they're kind of normal risks now. It's like, okay, you can do a YouTube channel, but everyone's doing a YouTube channel, so it's not much of a risk. So I want my children to take risks, go and explore the world, don't be static, help people. That is the greatest asset you can provide humanity, is to help other humans that you're along this journey with. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to work in a soup kitchen, but always think about what you're doing. How could that ultimately benefit the population as a whole? So yeah, that's, I think it's going to be difficult. I think for the generation, when I have children, I think it's going to be a very, very challenging time to for children, because, the other thing that I believe is we no longer have innocence. I remember growing up, until I was, maybe 15, there was a certain level of innocence to the world. I don't think kids have that anymore. I think from a very early age, they have to grow up much, and I had to grow up fast. I had to grow up very fast. But I think kids these days grow up even faster, and I think that's sad, because there is something beautiful about innocence, and I think that's eroding.
Well, you've been very stoic with your feedback and advice, because it's true. And I look at kids, and you're right, the innocence is gone. I mean, they're exposed to everything from a super early age, whether you want them to be or not. And it's hard, but I would say there's a beauty in being vulnerable. right? And I think that a lot of adults, I mean, it sounds like you've learned a lot of that. That's what I've learned in the last several years, is there's a power, right, around being vulnerable and being willing to say you're not smart and you don't know everything, and you make mistakes. And, and that's, I think there's a lot of power behind that, because it opens up your mind to just tremendous opportunity and experience, right? Which I think that's what we're all trying to have, is fulfilling, meaningful experiences, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so this is a total transition to your company right now, which I think is fascinating. It's one of those technologies that's ripe. The actual industry itself and the functionality, right, is right now primarily controlled by banking institutions, right? The institutions that I would say, they're losing it, but they still have a tremendous influence, right, over legislature, over people, over advertising, right, which is financial services. So talk to us about Digits. It's digits.io is the website. We'll put that on the show notes and on the website and social media. But talk to us about Digits and what it does and how it's revolutionizing the security associated with financial payments.
Yeah, so around 3 years ago, I joined a traditional payments company, a company that processes payments for Visa, MasterCard, Amex, etc. At that point, I had no payments experience at all. And, when you swipe your credit card, you don't really think about it that much. I mean, one of the crazy things about America is that in America, you have to choose credit or debit. We don't have that in the UK. So I didn't know why that existed and learned why that existed. And what you learn about the payments industry is it's incredibly fragmented. There's lots of entrenched players, very risk adverse. And so as we were going through this process about a year ago, I recognized that we should have a crypto strategy. And I was given the task of making crypto payments as simple as paying with your credit card. And I took that quite literally and came up with a concept that allows you to turn any credit or debit card in the world, including the ones in your pocket, into a crypto card. But that kind of created two big problems, because even though I worked out how I could get consumer to swipe and pay with crypto, and it comes out of their crypto account, I was left with the two biggest problems in crypto payments, which is there's a lot of volatility. And also the payments aren't instant. It can take 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes for that money to actually hit the other account. So I had to come up with a way to solve that, because merchants don't like volatility. They want to get the amount of money they're spending at exactly the time they're spending it. And they don't want the risk of having to wait 30 minutes to know whether that payment's actually gone through, because they're giving you the product. So I came up with something called on the back end. So the front end of Digits is really simple. You swipe the card, it takes the crypto. But on the crypto, on the other side, I had to solve these two big problems. And we came up with a new financial instrument called the Hedge Lending Network, which is a new financial instrument that basically solves the two biggest problems in payments. In crypto payments, which is volatility and network transmission time. So we've kind of built this kind of engine, and we want people to build upon it as well. I've built the products a little bit like Google. They're totally separate products, and people can build upon them. But it's really a solution that just makes crypto simpler, so more people can use it. And we know if more people can use it, more people can access it. That takes down the barriers to entry. We're especially excited in the area of the unbanked or underbanked, where we can really provide facilities that a lot of these people haven't been able to access before. And we're currently in pre-ICO, and we're going to do an ICO in September, and we're on that path.
Well, there is, I mean, that world, I would say, especially for those kind of in the upper echelon of financial services, and which includes banking, insurance, investments, right? I think they're starting to see the significance, of blockchain, of being able to, raise money through ICO. And do you think that there is a fear associated with that, or how do you see some of the bigger institutions and their openness to technologies such as yours?
I think it's a little bit like the days of the internet, right? At the beginning, big companies don't really see it coming up, or they don't see the technologies, how it's going to impact them. And I think the same is true for crypto. I think right now there's a lot of conservatism in the marketplace. I think a lot of institutions are holding back, but it's totally normal. The amazing thing is that institutions can wait 5 years and then jump in when it's a Me Too product, because they've got billions of dollars to back that up. They can hedge their bets. So I think the way it's going to pan out is that the next 5 years, crypto will still be seen as a kind of niche product, but as it kind of matures, it's going to become a more mainstream product. And I think we have, unless the US government did something really, really horrific in terms of regulations, I think we're past the point of no return in terms of the technology. Not far past it, but past it. And as we know in crypto, everything gets condensed. So we've, the last 2 years has probably been the equivalent roller coaster ride of the .com 7 years. I hope we've had our boom, we've had our correction, and hopefully I think it will stable out. My personal view is that we're gonna see some stagnated growth before it goes big again.
And that's where you have kind of the adoption cycle, and the phases of anything new, or phases of truth, where it goes through those periods of skepticism, periods of mocking, right, and then extreme volatility. But then after that, that's when you have widespread adoption, right?
Yeah,
and it's accepted. So it's interesting to see just a lot of the technologies that are being funded. And I think it's a risky bet in a lot of senses, as far as what technology, what ICO, what which technology is going to work, right, or be applicable. But at the same time, because of how much of it there is, it's just a matter of time where it's going to be a lot more efficient, and the adoption is going to be not necessarily forced, but you'd be just not smart to not adopt it. So how do you set Digits apart from some of the other, cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies that have come out over the last few years?
Well, I think we're kind of an application that sits above the blockchain. We're kind of a solution that provides an infrastructure to solve two big problems in crypto payments. I think in terms of how we're different from everyone else, most companies trying to solve this problem are issuing physical cards, which is a huge challenge, a very costly process.
Yep.
You have all kinds of potential issues with that, and we're coming at it from a very different angle. I think we've got some nice first mover advantage. Like all these things, it's crypto, it's a roller coaster ride, it's high risk, gives me a few more gray hairs. But we're working hard. We got a great team. We got, I believe, a great concept, and we're trying to get it out there.
Yeah, you have a very impressive board of advisors too. And I think oftentimes that is, I would say more than often, probably all the time, is, it's really those advisors that come at business from a dozen different angles that you don't. And conceptualizing it really comes down to the team that, protects from, the foxes, as you put it in your initial story. And, it's one of those things where smart minds around you make a huge difference. Maybe you can comment on that, and then we can wrap things up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trust me, I know, the one the one good thing about having lived a lot of life and having a lot of failures is you learn what you're good at and what you're bad at. So putting together a good team and finding the areas that can complement your own weaknesses is the most important thing. And we brought together an exceptional team. They come from PayPal, Apple, Ripple, Visa, exceptional team we put together. And that's really all business is about. It's this is what people forget really especially a business, the smaller sizes of business, it's all about people. Both your customers are still human beings, and your team are still human beings, and you're all just trying to solve problems for each other.
Well, Ben, it was awesome to have you on. This has been a pretty fascinating conversation, and I appreciate your time. We'll put all of your contact info on show notes and social media. But for those that are listening, would you mind just talking about the easiest ways to follow you or to learn more about Digits?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to digits.io. You're always welcome to email me on b@digits.io. I'm on Twitter, Facebook. I have one way or another. There's probably 1,000 contact points out there for you to find me. But yeah, very accessible, and thanks for your time.
Okay. All right, Ben. Well, we'll when your new book comes out, we'll definitely circle back and do an interview. I find that topic fascinating. But congratulations. Best of luck with everything, man.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us as the Wealth Standard Podcast spends all of 2018 celebrating life, liberty, and property. Be sure to leave us a review on iTunes, and we'll see you on the next one.